I Have a Dream is a public speech delivered by American civil rights activist Martin Luther King, Jr. on August 28, 1963, in which he calls for an end to racism in the United States. Delivered to over 250,000 civil rights supporters from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington, the speech was a defining moment of the American civil rights movement. Beginning with a reference to the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed millions of slaves in 1863, King observes that, 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. Toward the end of the speech, King departed from his prepared text for a partly improvised peroration on the theme I Have a Dream, prompted by Mahalia Jackson's cry, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." In this part of the speech, which most excited the listeners and has now become its most famous, King described his dreams of freedom and equality arising from a land of slavery and hatred. Jon Meacham writes that, with a single phrase, Martin Luther King, Jr. joined Jefferson and Lincoln in the ranks of men who've shaped modern America. The speech was ranked the top American speech of the 20th century in a 1999 poll of scholars of public address. Background: the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was partly intended to demonstrate mass support for the civil rights legislation proposed by President Kennedy in June. Martin Luther King and other leaders therefore agreed to keep their speeches calm, also, to avoid provoking the civil disobedience which had become the hallmark of the civil rights movement. King originally designed his speech as a homage to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, timed to correspond with the 100-year centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. Speech title and the writing process: King had been preaching about dreams since 1960, when he gave a speech to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People called The Negro and the American Dream. This speech discusses the gap between the American dream and reality, saying that overt white supremacists have violated the dream, and that our federal government has also scarred the dream through its apathy and hypocrisy, its betrayal of the cause of justice. King suggests that it may well be that the Negro was God's instrument to save the soul of America. He had also delivered a dream speech in Detroit, in June 1963, when he marched on Woodward Avenue with Walter Reuther and the Reverend C.L. Franklin, and had rehearsed other parts. The March on Washington speech, known as I Have a Dream speech, has been shown to have had several versions, written at several different times. It is no single version draft, but is an amalgamation of several drafts, and was originally called Normalcy, Never Again. Little of this, and another Normalcy speech, ended up in the final draft. A draft of Normalcy, Never Again is housed in the Morehouse College Martin Luther King, Jr. collection of the Robert W. Woodruff Library, Atlanta University Center and Morehouse College. The focus on I Have a Dream comes through the speech's delivery. Toward the end of his delivery, noted African-American gospel singer Mahalia Jackson shouted to King from the crowd, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King stopped delivering his prepared speech, and started preaching, punctuating his points with I Have a Dream. The speech was drafted with the assistance of Stanley Levison and Clarence Benjamin Jones in Riverdale, New York City. Jones has said that the logistical preparations for the march were so burdensome that the speech was not a priority for us, and that, on the evening of Tuesday, August 27, 12 hours before the march, Martin still didn't know what he was going to say. Leading up to the speech's rendition at the Great March on Washington, King had delivered its I Have a Dream refrains in his speech before 25,000 people in Detroit's Cobo Hall immediately after the 125,000-strong Great Walk to Freedom in Detroit, June 23, 1963. After the Washington, D.C. March, a recording of King's Cobo Hall speech was released by Detroit's Gordy Records as an LP entitled The Great March to Freedom. The speech, widely hailed as a masterpiece of rhetoric, King's speech invokes the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the United States Constitution. Early in his speech, King alludes to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address by saying 50 years ago. In reference to the abolition of slavery articulated in the Emancipation Proclamation, King says, "It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity." Anaphora is employed throughout the speech. Early in his speech, King urges his audience to seize the moment. "Now is the time" is repeated 3 times in the 6th paragraph. The most widely cited example of anaphora is found in the often quoted phrase "I have a dream," which is repeated 8 times as King paints a picture of an integrated and unified America for his audience. Other occasions include 100 years later, "We can never be satisfied, with this faith, let freedom ring," and "Free at last." King was the 16th out of 18 people to speak that day, according to the official program. Among the most quoted lines of the speech include "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." According to U.S. Representative John Lewis, who also spoke that day as the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Dr. King had the power, the ability, and the capacity to transform those steps on the Lincoln Memorial into a monumental area that will forever be recognized. By speaking the way he did, he educated, he inspired, he informed not just the people there, but people throughout America and unborn generations. The ideas in the speech reflect King's social experiences of the mistreatment of blacks. The speech draws upon appeals to America's myths as a nation founded to provide freedom and justice to all people, and then reinforces and transcends those secular mythologies by placing them within a spiritual context by arguing that racial justice is also in accord with God's will. Thus, the rhetoric of the speech provides redemption to America for its racial sins. King describes the promises made by America as a promissory note on which America has defaulted. He says that America has given the Negro people a bad check, but that we've come to cash this check by marching in Washington, D.C., similarities and illusions. King's speech uses words and ideas from his own speeches and other texts. For years, he had spoken about dreams, quoted from "My Country, 'Tis of Thee," and of course referred extensively to the Bible. The idea of constitutional rights as an unfulfilled promise was suggested by Clarence Jones. The closing passage from King's speech partially resembles Archibald Carey, Jr.'s address to the 1952 Republican National Convention. Both speeches end with a recitation of the first verse of Samuel Francis Smith's popular patriotic hymn "America," and the speeches share the name of one of several mountains from which both exhort "Let freedom ring." King also is said to have built on Prathia Hall's speech at the site of a burned-down African-American church in Terrell County, Georgia in September 1962, in which she used the repeated phrase "I have a dream." The speech also alludes to Psalm 35 in the second stanza of the speech. Additionally, King quotes from Isaiah 44:5 and Amos 5:24. He also alludes to the opening lines of Shakespeare's Richard III when he remarks that this sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn. The speech and rhetoric. The "I have a dream" speech can be dissected by using 3 rhetorical lenses: voice merging, prophetic voice, and dynamic spectacle. Voice merging is the combining of one's own voice with religious predecessors. Prophetic voice is using rhetoric to speak for a population. A dynamic spectacle has origins from the Aristotelian definition as a weak hybrid form of drama, a theatrical concoction that relied upon external factors such as televised rituals of conflict and social control. Voice merging is a common technique used amongst African American preachers. It combines the voices of previous preachers and excerpts from scriptures along with their own unique thoughts to create a unique voice. King uses voice merging in his peroration when he references the secular hymn "America." By using this technique, King adds a level of power to his rhetoric. The rhetoric of King's speech can be compared to the rhetoric of Old Testament prophets. During King's speech, he speaks with urgency and crisis, giving him a prophetic voice. The prophetic voice must restore one's sense of duty and virtue amidst the decay of venality. An evident example is when King declares that now is a time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Given the context of the drama and tension of which it was situated, King's speech can be classified as a dynamic spectacle. A dynamic spectacle is dependent on the situation in which it is used. It can be considered a dynamic spectacle because it happened at the correct time and place, during the Civil Rights Movement and the March on Washington. Responses: the speech was lauded in the days after the event, and was widely considered the high point of the march by contemporary observers. James Reston, writing for the New York Times, said that Dr. King touched all the themes of the day, only better than anybody else. He was full of the symbolism of Lincoln and Gandhi, and the cadences of the Bible. He was both militant and sad, and he sent the crowd away feeling that the long journey had been worthwhile. Reston also noted that the event was better covered by television and the press than any event here since President Kennedy's inauguration, and opined that it will be a long time before Washington forgets the melodious and melancholy voice of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. crying out his dreams to the multitude. An article in the Boston Globe by Mary McGrory reported that King's speech caught the mood, and moved the crowd of the day as no other speaker in the event. Mark E. Childs of the Washington Post wrote that King's speech rose above mere oratory. An article in the Los Angeles Times commented that the matchless eloquence displayed by King a supreme orator of a type so rare as almost to be forgotten in our age put to shame the advocates of segregation by inspiring the conscience of America with the justice of the civil rights cause. The Federal Bureau of Investigation also noticed the speech, which provoked them to expand their COINTELPRO operation against the SCLC, and to target King specifically as a major enemy of the United States. 2 days after King delivered I Have a Dream, Agent William C. Sullivan, the head of COINTELPRO, wrote a memo about King's growing influence. In the light of King's powerful demagogic speech yesterday, he stands head and shoulders above all other Negro leaders put together when it comes to influencing great masses of Negroes. We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro and national security. The speech was a success for the Kennedy administration and for the liberal civil rights coalition that had planned it. It was considered a triumph of managed protest, and not one arrest relating to the demonstration occurred. Kennedy had watched King's speech on TV and been very impressed. Afterwards, March leaders accepted an invitation to the White House to meet with President Kennedy. Kennedy felt the march bolstered the chances for his civil rights bill. Some of the more radical black leaders who were present condemned the speech as too compromising. Malcolm X later wrote in his autobiography, "Whoever heard of angry revolutionaries swinging their bare feet together with their oppressor in lily-pad pools, with gospels and guitars and I Have a Dream speeches?" Legacy. The March on Washington put pressure on the Kennedy administration to advance its civil rights legislation in Congress. The Diaries of Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., published posthumously in 2007, suggest that President Kennedy was concerned that if the march failed to attract large numbers of demonstrators, it might undermine his civil rights efforts. In the wake of the speech and march, King was named Man of the Year by Time magazine for 1963. And in 1964, he was the youngest person ever awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The full speech did not appear in writing until August 1983, some 15 years after King's death, when a transcript was published in the Washington Post. In 1990, the Australian alternative comedy rock band Doug Anthony All-Stars released an album called Icon. One song from Icon, Shang-a-Lang, sampled the end of the speech. In 2002, the Library of Congress honored the speech by adding it to the United States National Recording Registry. In 2003, the National Park Service dedicated an inscribed marble pedestal to commemorate the location of King's speech at the Lincoln Memorial. On August 26, 2013, UK's BBC Radio 4 broadcast God's Trombone, in which Gary Younge looked behind the scenes of the speech and explored what made it both timely and timeless. On August 28, 2013, thousands gathered on the Mall in Washington, D.C., where King made his historic speech to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the occasion. In attendance were former U.S. Presidents Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, and President Barack Obama, who addressed the crowd and spoke on the significance of the event. Many of King's family were in attendance. Copyright dispute. Because King's speech was broadcast to a large radio and television audience, there was controversy about its copyright status. If the performance of the speech constituted general publication, it would have entered the public domain due to King's failure to register the speech with the Registrar of Copyrights. However, if the performance only constituted limited publication, King retained common law copyright. This led to a lawsuit, Estate of Martin Luther King, Jr., Incorporated v. CBS, Incorporated, which established that the King estate does hold copyright over the speech and had standing to sue. The parties then settled. Unlicensed use of the speech or a part of it can still be lawful in some circumstances, especially in jurisdictions under doctrines such as fair use or fair dealing. Under the applicable copyright laws, the speech will remain under copyright in the United States until 70 years after King's death, therefore until 2038. Original copy of the speech. As King waved goodbye to the audience, he handed George Raveling the original typewritten I Have a Dream speech. Raveling, an All-American basketball player from Villanova, had volunteered as a security guard for the event and was on the podium with King at that moment. Raveling still has custody of the original copy. Raveling has been offered as high as $3 million for the original copy of the speech, but claims to have no intention of selling it, with plans on leaving it to his children instead. References. External links. Full text at the BBC, video of I Have a Dream speech, from learnoutloud.com, I Have a Dream text and audio from AmericanRhetoric.com, deposition concerning recording of the I Have a Dream speech, lyrics of the traditional spiritual Free at Last, MLK, before he won the Nobel, slideshow by Life magazine, Piastic outline of Martin Luther King, Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech.